I kept the secret for 11 years, not because I was ashamed of it, not because I thought it didn't matter. I kept it because I wanted to see, really see, who my son had become. And when his wife looked me in the eye at my own kitchen table and told him I was a financial burden they could no longer carry, I finally had my answer. My name doesn't matter as my story does, but if you need something to call me what my grandchildren used to call me before all of this happened, Grandma June. I'm 67 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house I bought with cash in 2019, though my son didn't know that either. My son's name is Owen. He's 41. He married his wife Melissa 8 years ago, and I tried. Lord, I tried to love her the way you're supposed to love the woman your child chose. She was pretty in that effortful way, always dressed well, always smelling like something expensive. She called me June from the very first meeting before I'd invited her to. I told myself it was a generational thing. Young people don't say Mrs. anymore. I let it go. What I couldn't let go was the look she gave me at their wedding when I walked in wearing a blue dress instead of beige. She leaned toward her maid of honor and whispered something. They both smiled. I pretended not to see, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For most of Owen's childhood, I was a single mother. His father left when Owen was 9, and I won't spend time on that man because he's not worth the breath. What I will say is that from the moment that door closed behind him, I made a decision. My son would never lack for anything that mattered. Not love, not stability, not opportunity. I worked as a registered nurse for 23 years. I was good at it. Methodical, calm under pressure, the kind of nurse that doctors requested by name. When I was 52, I got my nurse practitioner license and moved into a private practice setting. The salary jumped considerably. Then I started picking up consulting work for 2 regional hospital systems, reviewing patient care protocols. By the time Owen got married, I was clearing just over $18,000 a month between my salary and consulting fees. Not $45,000. I'm not a Wall Street executive, but more than enough to live well, save aggressively, and quietly do things my son never knew about. Owen knew I was a nurse. He knew I worked hard. He did not know the rest. I paid off my own house. I maxed out my retirement accounts every year. I had a brokerage account with just under $400,000 in it, and I had a separate account, one I'd been building quietly since Owen turned 30, that I always thought of as the fund. The fund existed for one reason. Owen had always wanted to open a restaurant. He talked about it his entire adult life. He'd gone to culinary school, then talked himself out of it, taken a management job, talked himself out of that, and spent his 30s half living his dream and half burying it, under practicality and Melissa's opinions about financial security. 3 years into their marriage, Owen finally did it. He found a location in Greenville, South Carolina, a beautiful old building with exposed brick and good bones, and he came to me trembling with excitement and terror in equal measure. He needed $85,000 to make it work alongside a small business loan he'd already been approved for. I wrote him a check that week. I told him it was most of my savings. I told him I believed in him, and that was the truth. What I didn't tell him was that writing that check barely dented what I had. What I didn't tell him was that I was still consulting, still earning, still adding to the fund regularly. I let him believe I had sacrificed enormously, not to manipulate him, but because I knew that if he understood how much I actually had, it would change something between us. He would stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as a resource. I had watched that happen to other women my age. I wasn't going to let it happen to me. The restaurant opened in 2021. It did well, not overnight sensation well, but steadily, genuinely well. Owen was proud. I was proud. For a little while, everything felt like it had been worth something. Then things started to shift. Melissa had never worked, which I understood. They'd made that choice together when their daughter was born. But as the restaurant found its footing, I noticed something. The calls from Erling got shorter. The Sunday dinners we used to share got spaced further and further apart. when I drove the 2 hours to Greenville to see them. Melissa was always just stepping out or in the middle of something. She was polite the way a hotel receptionist is polite. Efficient, practiced, without any warmth underneath it. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was one of those mothers who couldn't let go. I made myself smaller. I visited less. I called only when called. Then my hip started giving me trouble. It wasn't serious. I knew enough medicine to know that. But I needed to cut back on my consulting schedule for a few months while I managed the pain and waited for an injection to take effect. My income dropped. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. I mentioned it to Owen offhandedly on the phone one evening, just being honest, the way I always tried to be honest with him. I don't know if he told Melissa or if she was listening on the other end. But something changed after that call. The next time I visited, it was February, cold and grey. The kind of day that makes you want to be somewhere warm with people who love you. I arrived to find Melissa in the kitchen with a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Not impolite exactly. Something calculating. Over dinner, she started talking about the future. About how she and Owen had been thinking through their finances. About how the restaurant needed another round of investment, and they were trying to be smart. She talked for 10 minutes in that circling, never quite landing way she had. Owen cut up his food and didn't look at me. Then she said it. June, we've been talking about your situation, and we both think that it might make more sense for you to look at some kind of senior living option, something that would give you more support. I know your hip has been difficult, and honestly, we worry about you being up there alone. She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. We just can't be a financial safety net for you indefinitely. I hope you understand. I set down my fork. I want to tell you that I said something devastating and perfect in that moment. I didn't. I sat very still and looked at my son, who was still not looking at me, and I thought about 11 years of secrets kept for his sake. I thought about $85,000. I thought about every Sunday dinner I'd driven 2 hours for, every holiday I'd swallowed my hurt to show up for, every time I'd made myself smaller so Melissa could feel bigger. I didn't realize I'd asked you for anything, I said. Melissa's smile flickered. Well, not directly, but these situations have a way of, Owen. I looked at my son. Is this what you think? He finally looked up, and what I saw on his face wasn't agreement exactly. It was something worse. It was discomfort. The look of a man who has let things go too far and doesn't know how to pull them back. Mum, she's not trying to be harsh. We just want to be realistic. I nodded. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the table. I hugged my granddaughter and told her I loved her and told her I roved 2 hours back to Asheville in the dark with the radio off. I did not cry until I pulled into my own driveway. Then I cried for a long time. The next morning I called my financial advisor, a woman named Lorraine who had been managing my brokerage account for 6 years. I told her what had happened. Not for advice. I already knew what I was going to do. But because I needed to say it out loud to someone before I could be sure I wasn't making a decision out of anger. Lorraine listened. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to restructure everything," I said, "and I want it done quietly." She understood. Here is what my son did not know. 3 years earlier, when I'd given him the $85,000 for the restaurant, I had done it through a formal loan agreement that my attorney drafted. Owen knew he'd signed paperwork. I told him it was for tax purposes, which wasn't entirely untrue. What the paperwork actually established was that the $85,000 was a secured loan, not a gift, and that if it was not repaid within 10 years, I retained right to a 30% equity stake in the restaurant. Owen had signed it without reading it carefully. I had not pushed him to read it carefully. I'm not proud of that. But I had my reasons. He had repaid about $40,000 of it over the years, in irregular installments, usually when the restaurant had a good quarter. That left $45,000 outstanding, and 30% of a restaurant that become genuinely profitable was worth considerably more than $45,000. I called my attorney next. I want to be clear about something. Because I know how this sounds, I was not trying to take anything from my son. The restaurant was his dream and his work and his life, and I never wanted to undo that. What I was doing was making sure I was seen, really seen, not as a burden, not as an elderly woman shuffling toward a nursing home, as the person who had made a great deal of what they had possible and who deserved to be treated accordingly. My attorney sent Owen a letter 2 weeks later. It was professional and precise, and it outlined the terms of the original loan agreement in full. It noted the outstanding balance. It noted the equity clause. It requested a meeting. Owen called me before his attorney could call him back. He was not angry, which surprised me. He was quiet in a way I recognized, the quietness of a person absorbing something they should have known a long time ago. "Mum," he said, "how much? I mean, the consulting. How much are you actually—" "I'm fine, Owen," I said. "I have always been fine. That's what I needed you to understand." The silence on the phone lasted a long time. "She said you were struggling," he finally said. "I know what she said." Another silence. "Then I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really sorry." I believed him. Owen is not a bad man. He is a man who loved a woman who brought out the worst of his passivity and the best of his ambition, and he had let the balance tip in the wrong direction for too long. That's not nothing, but it's also not everything. We met in person the following weekend, just the two of us, at a diner in Hendersonville, halfway between our two cities. I got there first and ordered coffee, and sat by the window and watched the mountains through the glass. When Owen walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept well. Good, I thought, and then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. He sat down across from me and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me everything. All of it, please." So I did. I told him about the consulting income. I told him about the brokerage account. I told him about the fund I'd kept for years with his name on it in my head. I told him about the house. I told him about the loan agreement and why I'd structured it the way I had, not as a trap, but as a protection. For both of us. When I finished, he looked out the window for a while. "Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I wanted you to treat me like your mother," I said, "not like a bank." He winced. It was the right thing to say because it was the true thing. "And Melissa?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. She feels terrible." "I imagine she does. She wants to apologize." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. "I know she does, and I'll hear it, Owen, when I'm ready. But I need something from you first." I looked at him directly. "I need you to be my son, not her husband first and my son second. I need you to be able to look at me across a table and tell me the truth about what's happening. And I need you to be able to tell her the truth about who I am to you. Can you do that?" He didn't answer immediately. I was glad. A quick answer would have felt like performance. The pause felt like actual thought. "Yes," he said finally. "I can do that. We talked for 2 hours. We ordered breakfast and then lunch, and the waitress refilled my coffee so many times I lost count. We talked about his father and about the years when it was just the two of us, and about how somewhere along the way we had both gotten so busy protecting each other from hard things that we'd stopped actually knowing each other." Before we left, I told him what I'd decided about the restaurant. I wasn't exercising the equity clause. I was forgiving the remaining $45,000 of the loan outright, not as a gift born of guilt or manipulation, but as a genuine clean slate. What I wanted in return was simple, honesty going forward, a real seat at the table, not a courtesy one, and dinner once a month, in person. Just us, with Melissa when she was ready. Without her until then. Owen's eyes went red at the edges. He pressed his lips together and looked away for a second. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know I didn't have to," I said. "That's the point. Melissa called me on a Tuesday evening about 3 weeks later. I was on my back porch watching the sun go down over the ridge. I almost didn't answer. I did. She cried almost immediately, which I hadn't expected. Not performed crying. The messy, sniffly kind that doesn't flatter anyone. She said she was ashamed. She said she had convinced herself of a story about me that wasn't true, and she had let that story make her cruel. She said she was sorry for the word burden. She said it more than once. I listened. I didn't rush her or rescue her from the discomfort of it. When she was done, I said, "Melissa, I forgive you, and I mean that. But I need you to understand something." I paused. "I am not going anywhere. I am not declining. I am not a problem to be managed. I am Owen's mother, and I am your daughter-in-law's grandmother, and I will be present in this family for as long as God gives me breath. I'd like very much for us to figure out how to make that something good." She said, "I'd like that too." I think she meant it. I choose to believe she meant it, because the alternative is to spend whatever years I have left in bitterness, and I am not willing to do that. I have worked too hard and loved too much to let bitterness be what I'm made of at the end. That was 8 months ago. Owen and I have dinner every month. Sometimes Melissa comes, and she is different, not transformed, not perfect, but different in the ways that count. She asks me questions now. Real ones. She called me last spring when she was scared about something with my granddaughter's health, and she called me first, before her own mother, because she knew I would know what to do. I did know. I stayed calm and told her exactly what steps to take, and everything was fine. My granddaughter is 5 now. She calls me Grandma June. Last month she told me I smelled like flowers and cookies, which is the finest compliment I have ever received in 67 years on this earth. I never moved into senior living. I never needed to. My hip is fine. My consulting income is fully restored, and every time I pull into my own driveway, the house I bought with cash on the street shaded by old oaks, I think about that night I drove home in the dark with the radio off. I think about how close I came to believing what they seemed to want me to believe, that I was finished, that I was fading, that my value had an expiration date. I was never finished. I was never fading. I was just waiting to be seen. And now I am. I keep coming back to that drive home. 2 hours in the dark, radio off, just the sound of the highway and my own breathing. At the time it felt like the loneliest I had ever been. Now I understand it was actually the moment everything started to turn. Not because of anything dramatic, but because of a choice I made somewhere around mile marker 47 on I-26. I was not going to disappear just because someone had decided it was convenient for me to. That's the thing about being treated as invisible. It only works if you agree to it. What happened to me, what happened between Owen and Melissa and me, wasn't really about money. The $85,000, the equity clause, the consulting income I never mentioned. Those were just the facts underneath a much older story. The story was about whether a woman past 60 still gets to take up space, whether she still gets to matter. Melissa had already written the ending to that story before she ever sat down at my kitchen table, and Owen, bless him, had been too tired or too conflict-averse or too in love to pick up a pen and write something different. I don't say that to be hard on my son. I say it because I spent a lot of years doing the same thing, not picking up the pen. Letting other people narrate my life because it felt easier, or kinder, or less complicated than insisting on my own version. And I can trace a straight line from every time I swallowed something true, because I didn't want to make someone uncomfortable, directly to that dinner table in February where Melissa told me I was a burden with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We teach people how to treat us. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, but I've sat with it. What I've also come to understand is that the choices I made, keeping the loan agreement, structuring things carefully, not spending down my security to make my son feel more comfortable about accepting my help, those weren't cold or calculating. They were the decisions of a woman who had spent decades solving problems, who knew that love without clear thinking is just sentiment, And that sentiment doesn't hold up well when money and pride and fear get into the room together. Wisdom isn't the opposite of love. It's what love looks like when it has to survive real life. And then there's the matter of showing up anyway. After that drive home, after the crying in the driveway, after the call to Lorraine and the call to my attorney and all the paperwork and all the waiting, I could have let the hurt calcify into something permanent. Plenty of people do. Instead, I drove to Hendersonville and ordered coffee and sat by the window and waited for my son to walk through the door, because I had decided that the relationship was worth more than being right, and that forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was just a longer, harder form of strength. I think about the woman Melissa called that night, crying the kind of crying that doesn't flatter anyone. She had convinced herself of a story and lived inside it until it made her cruel. When the story collapsed, she had to face what she'd done. That takes something, too. Not the same thing I had to find in myself, but something. What I know now, after all of it, is this. The life I have is the life I built. The security, the house, the relationship with my son that is finally honest. I earned all of it through years of showing up and thinking clearly and refusing to quit when quitting would have been so much easier. Nobody handed me a soft landing. I made one, quietly, over a very long time, and I am still making it.